So Nintendo's just held their latest and final mini direct of the year, and there was some pretty interesting stuff that came through to it. We got to see some new games, and some pushback and delayed games as well. But the thing that stood out to me the most was the announcement of some more cloud streaming games. Now, this isn't the first time that we've seen cloud streaming games for the Nintendo Switch. In fact, we saw these quite early on. We got Resident Evil 7 and we also got Assassin's Creed, but they were only available through cloud streaming over in Japan and not in the West. Whereas this time we're seeing Control and Hitman 3 available for users in the West and basically everywhere to be able to stream from the cloud to their Nintendo Switch. So there are a couple of reasons why I find this really interesting, and it kind of makes me question a few things, and it gives us a bit of insight into the direction that Nintendo is going with some of their devices. So before we jump into some of the reasons why I find this so interesting, we've actually streamed Control onto this device. So it is available as of right now, and you can go onto Nintendo's eShop, and there is a 10-minute demo available for you. So that way you can test out and see whether or not this runs well on your device and your setup at home. So the gameplay that you're seeing right now is gameplay that we captured running on our device, and to kind of put this into perspective, I do have a 500 megabit download speed, so I was kind of expecting to get relatively good streaming performance, but I was using this upstairs in probably the room furthest away from the router. So what I normally find is when I do any form of game streaming, and especially if it's game streaming over the web through like NVIDIA GeForce Now or any other service like that, if I'm not downstairs and relatively near the router, things start to fall apart. I see massive drops in gameplay, drops in frames, and it becomes a bit of an unplayable mess. This was actually surprisingly good. Now, I was using it through their performance mode, but it still looked good, it still played well, and there wasn't really any latency. I didn't find any issues with my controllers, and as you can see in the video, I detached the Joy-Cons so that way I was using them over Bluetooth, and that didn't interfere with the performance, which you kind of expect with this sort of thing. When you start throwing in multiple wireless input methods and download methods, what you tend to find is they start conflicting, and you'll see drop frames or drop latency, and it just becomes a bit of a mess. But actually, this played surprisingly well. Now, as I said, I was expecting relatively good things just because I've got a 500 megabit download speed. However, when I take into consideration the fact that I was in the room furthest away, if I do anything like GeForce Now in this room, I tend to find that things fall apart very, very quickly. So hats off to the way that Nintendo are doing this. The game itself looked great, it played well, I didn't see any frame rate drops. Now, bearing in mind it's only a 10-minute demo, it doesn't give you a full picture of what that's going to look like. And I was playing in the UK at 10 AM, so the UK's will be relatively quiet in comparison to playing at peak time, but for me it played really well, and it's a massive hats off to them. The fact that it forces you to actually play the demo first. You have to play that first 10 minutes before you're able to buy the game, so that way you get that chance to really find out whether or not your setup at home is going to work with this, because there's going to be all sorts of things where your download speeds aren't going to be good enough, or the bandwidth's not going to be good enough. So it's great to see that they're taking this approach, making you test it out first, so that way you're happy with it, because you've got to bear in mind, even though you're cloud streaming this thing, you are paying a full price. So for me here, it's $34.99. So I still have to pay full price than I would have to on any other platform to actually own it and be able to play it natively on the device. And that's for cloud streaming, so that's worth bearing in mind. So you might be asking, why is it that this was the standout feature from this Nintendo Direct Mini? And for me, it's the setup of it. These are some sort of AAA games, they're really graphically intensive, they obviously can't run on the Nintendo Switch unless they did some kind of miracles and really pared down the performance and the graphics fidelity and all of that. And it makes me wonder, is this the direction that we're seeing this device move into? And there's a couple of benefits of that, and there's a couple of downsides. Now, cloud streaming has been all the rage. We've seen Microsoft go full hog into that. So we have Google are delivering their own cloud streaming, Amazon are delivering their own cloud streaming service, and Facebook as well. So there are some very, very big names in tech at the moment going into cloud streaming, unless you're Apple, of course, and you absolutely hate the idea of cloud streaming because you hate gaming. But all the big players at the moment are going massively into game streaming, and it's interesting to see Nintendo move their service across from Japan over to places like the USA and the UK, because it has some massive potential there. Also, users who have been digging around have found that there's a copy of Resident Evil 3 available for cloud streaming, so it looks like that's probably not too far off as well. So some big titles that can't run natively on this device that will be available through cloud streaming. And from my experience of it so far, it runs really, really well. It runs much better than I expected it to, and there's a couple of reasons for that. First up, the Wi-Fi on my Nintendo Switch, and from what I've been able to find out on most people's Nintendo Switches, is terrible. Like, I tend to only get one bar when I'm upstairs, and that's just really frustrating, but somehow it's still pulling it off. But it makes me wonder, are we going to see updated hardware at some point in the very near future that's going to have a bigger focus on cloud streaming? And that's been thrown around for ages that we're going to see a Nintendo Switch Pro coming out at some point in the near future. And although Nintendo have said we won't be seeing it this year, that then opens up 2021 for that Nintendo Switch Pro. And the whole thing's been, we're going to see something with much better graphics, better performance, and now it just makes me wonder, are we going to see something with a sharper screen quality that's going to be more focused at game streaming rather than having everything on the device? And that seems bizarre to me. Although everybody is going towards that game streaming, and it makes sense to have game streaming capabilities on this device, it's still mostly a handheld device or a portable device, and I know at the moment we're all kind of locked away and we can't get out, but once we are able to get out and everything, you won't be able to play a lot of these games. So if, for example, Resident Evil 3 comes out and you've got your copy of Control and you're playing Hitman 3 and other titles start coming across onto Nintendo's gaming service, what does that look like when you're out and about? And obviously we've got things like 5G that are rolling out, and that makes me wonder, are we going to see an improved version of this in the very near future that has a much better screen quality, 5G capabilities, improved Wi-Fi, and a slightly tweaked processor, but not making a massive difference in terms of the actual graphics processing on the device itself? I'm personally a massive fan of game streaming. I use it all the time to game stream from my PC through to my phone or through to my tablet, and if I'm out and about and I've got 4G connectivity, I'll often stream it from there as well, and I can stream it from GeForce Now or I can stream it from my PC using Steam, and it's a pretty good service and it tends to work really well. So it kind of fleshes out that future for Nintendo, and I guess it does give AAA developers that have been, I guess, hands-off with the Nintendo Switch. If these things prove to be a success, are we going to start to see more AAA games made available through cloud streaming and making this even more of a hybrid device? So you'll start to see, obviously, your Nintendo titles that are on there running natively, and you'll see other types of games that are running natively on this device through ports, but then it opens up an even bigger library, making this, I guess, a more appealing device for a lot of people to use if we start seeing those games available. When you're at home, you'll be able to dock it or use an improved 1080 or even a 1440 screen through streaming, and then when you're running the games natively on the device, you start seeing your 720 displays and all of that. It starts to hybridize this thing even more, which could be very interesting. Then again, it does have some of those issues. If you're hybridizing it and you're starting to have those cloud gaming services and you can only use those at home, or unless you've got a very good connection when you're out and about, it starts to take one of the main appeals away from this. It'll be very interesting to see what happens next. Like I said, some users have dug around, they found copies of Resident Evil 3 on there, so I assume we're going to see that be announced at some point very shortly, and that kind of shows that there are more titles coming, and they're probably dipping their toes at the moment to see how it's done. The device itself works really well for game streaming, but try it yourself. You can go onto the eShop and you can do the 10-minute demo. I would recommend, if you are trying out Control, skip all of the cutscenes, and this was one of the things I read up about before actually trying it myself. If you don't skip all the cutscenes, you're literally just going to be streaming the initial introduction and all the cutscenes and the tutorial and stuff like that. So obviously when you start it up, you want to skip through absolutely everything, so that way you can have some hands-on experience with how well the game runs on your setup at home, because it is going to vary, and what you don't want to do is end up wasting that 10 minutes just watching all the cutscenes, because you can go back to that. If you find that the game performs well on your setup and you do want to go for it, then you can pick it up and obviously start again. But skip the cutscenes, otherwise you won't get any game time on it, and it just won't give you an experience as to whether or not this works with your setup at home. So let us know your thoughts. Are you excited for game streaming on the Nintendo Switch? Do you think they're going to be doing even more with this in the future, or do you think this is just kind of a way to get a few developers on board and give them that option to obviously get to Nintendo customers? It's an exciting time, and I think there'll be some interesting things coming in the future, and it does make me wonder a lot of things about the Nintendo Switch Pro. But it's all up in the air, and at the moment no one has any real idea what's coming, but that's just a few of my theories. So fingers crossed you've enjoyed this video. If you have, hit that subscribe button, because you really help the channel grow, and we will be bringing some more awesome content to you in the future. So stay tuned, stay safe, and we'll see you soon. Bye!